I will start by welcoming you all. We are here today to talk about press events. So again, I will start by introducing myself and the Water Hub, but as you join, please feel free to drop your name and organization and where you are in the world in the chat, so everyone can say hi. And we'll also, my dear colleague Bridget is going to be manning the chat while I'm presenting. So if you have any questions that come up, we'll have a couple of time for pauses. Please feel free to raise your hand or put a question in the chat, and Bridget can kindly interrupt me while we're going through the presentation. We should have some time at the end too for discussion. And yeah, look forward to hearing about all the work that you all are doing as well. So to start to introduce myself, my name is Sarah Bucci. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Water Hub's Director of Strategic Communications. I live in Denver, Colorado on what is Arapaho and Cheyenne territory. And I joined the Water Hub just under 2 years ago, but I've been working in environmental organizing and advocacy for the last decade. The Water Hub, as many of you know, I see many familiar faces, or names, excuse me. But for those who don't know, we are a project of Climate Nexus. We are a grant-funded nonprofit, and we are a pro bono communications organization. And our goal is to work with advocates, activists, academics who are advancing water justice to make their communications efforts more effective. One of the ways that we do that is by hosting workshops like this, and we do them semi-regularly. And if you are already on our email list, that's probably how you found out about that. But if you're not, you can definitely sign up for our newsletter to continue to get information from us when we share new resources or trainings. And then I'll just make a plug now. At the end of this workshop, we really like to get feedback on what's helpful, what future workshops you would like to see from us, what wasn't so helpful. We really appreciate your honesty. So we'll have a link to a survey at the end of our hour-ish together. And then here are some beautiful photos of my lovely colleagues across the US. So first, I wanted to just start by grounding us and talking about, okay, why are we talking about press events? Why is this training relevant? Why are we doing it? Generating media coverage is a really important strategy for shaping public opinion, building public support, and influencing decisions. And I think we've probably all experienced how the media landscape is continuing to get more and more challenging to break through. There are more fragmented media outlets. We're getting our news from lots of different places, more niche places. Yet I wanted to take a step back and actually look at where do most people in the United States get their news from. And while online is by far the largest source, and that's grown a huge amount in the last 1 to 2 decades, majority of adults still get their news from TV. And that is significantly higher than those reading the print version of newspapers and magazines. And so earning those broadcast stories or the multimedia stories that are online that are more likely to be shared via social media, that can really help you reach new people, expand beyond your existing audience, and influence decision makers. And so those kinds of stories really require a visual element, and organizing press events is one way to do that. And so that's really the grounding of why we're spending time talking about this, because there are moments when it really makes sense to invest the time and energy into pulling off an event, and that can pay dividends in the influence of your campaigns. But we'll also talk a little bit about the times when maybe it doesn't make as much sense. So that all being said, as I mentioned, planning events takes your time, talent, treasure, and testimony to pull off well. And so we want to focus on what makes something newsworthy, event-worthy, so you know when to put in that effort. And then we'll also be talking about what the key elements are of an event and how to make the most out of events by getting the media to show up and also generating your own content from them. So I hope folks enjoy my Simpsons gifts. I'm actually quite proud of them throughout the presentation. But I wanted to start by talking about news hooks and what is a news hook. And I think that this GIF, it really does a good job of explaining what a news hook is. So in this scenario, the reporter or the journalist is Homer. The audience are the fish, and the hook on the fishing rod is the interesting idea or newsworthy element that's going to get the audience interested in the story. And it's our job as advocates, as communicators who are pitching stories, to make it really easy for journalists and editors to see why a story is timely, interesting, and newsworthy so that they will cover it. On the next slide, I'm going to share just a few lists of examples of what some news hooks are, but I was wondering if folks want to put in the chat or feel free to raise your hand. Do folks have any ideas or examples of hooks to get interest in a story? And I'll wait awkwardly for like a minute before I go to my next slide. Oh, the zeitgeist. Money and race. Breaking news, I see. Any other ideas? New innovation, conflict. Absolutely. Extreme weather events. Great. I think the stuff that's like, okay, so I'm going to go through this list. This is not exhaustive. I love there's like some of the things I'm seeing are like, all right, sexy topics, like stuff that's like gets a little edgy. That's definitely, I think, something that particularly broadcast, but all media, because they're looking for clicks, are often looking for. Breaking news, of course, like the news is called the news because it's new. A couple other ones I wanted to highlight. So just thinking about like, so me personally speaking, and I'm sure all of you believe that like successes in restoring a waterway or the threat to drinking water or groundwater issues or all kinds of things due to environmental justice, like those I think should get covered all the time. Like I think that they're newsworthy and important no matter what. But usually what you need is just a little something extra to like kind of get the attention, to kind of lead into a story to tell that bigger picture. And so if there's new breaking information, that can be anything from a natural disaster or current event. I saw extreme weather events in the chat. The release of new information or a report, the introduction of a bill, a development in a story, a plot twist. So, if there's a new unexpected co-sponsor on a legislation that you're working on, things like that. Numbers and rankings are another one I wanted to highlight. This is something I've had a lot of success with in my career. I used to work for a national environmental nonprofit. We did a lot of like ranking states across each other on various issues. And that was like, for some reason, catnip to reporters that like, oh, we can look at like how states or counties or cities are doing compared to one another on a variety of issues. And I don't know if it's because it's like easy to put that story into kind of like a mental box of like, oh, we are the best, we are the worst. But that has always been one that is good. Anniversaries, milestones, or observances. So I saw that in the chat as well from Sam. If there's coming up on the 5-year anniversary of Hurricane Harvey in Texas this year, observances like Earth Day and World Water Day, all of those things. And then localizing a national story. So we've been probably a lot of us thinking about, so many issues, but like, let's say, infrastructure has been in the news a lot. If you're able to go to your community and say, hey, we're doing an event where we're working on an issue where we can show you the kind of project that could be built or could be funded related to kind of this national conversation, or this issue that's being talked about on the national news is happening in our community, and we can put faces and names and places to those stories. That's something that folks are really looking for as well. Okay, so you've got a news hook. These are the elements. And then what I want to do next, excuse me, falling over my words a little bit here. The next thing I want to do is actually go through what are the elements that make a moment event worthy. So we'll talk about timeliness, visual storytelling, having compelling speakers, and calls to action. So timely. This is a photo from the outside of one of the California Coastal Commission hearings, where amazing organizers and advocates at Azul and the Coastkeeper and many other organizations fought successfully to get the Poseidon Huntington Beach desalination plant rejected. Huge victory. Ooh, awesome. I see there are folks there. And I thought this was a really great example to start with, because I felt like the organizations and activists who are leading this charge did a really great job of bird dogging the proceedings and generating ongoing pressure through the media, both throughout the campaign, but at these critical decision points. So for a decision point, for example, is like outside of a hearing or when a big vote is going to be scheduled. Oh, I see there is a question about what bird dogging is. That's basically when you just like follow decision makers around wherever they go. And I think it's a hunting reference. I'm not actually sure the origin. Other things that can be timely. So again, we talked about milestones or date specific events. So, you know, is it the anniversary of something? Is it connected to a holiday or a season? You know, we often think about, oh, what are the important issues we should think about going into the start of summer, the start of hurricane season or fire season, things like that. If you have like a groundbreaking or ribbon cutting on a project, those things are actually, I would consider timely, because it's like a moment connected to a moment in time. Again, new information, if you've got reports or new research, or you know the state is going to be releasing some analysis. And then lastly, rapid response. So responding to an event in the news, whether it's you know, a pollution event, an extreme weather event, a politicians did or said something good or bad. Those are all things that you can respond to. And so I would say, if you're thinking about whether or not to hold an event, the first thing you need to check off your list to say yes is it timely? The next element is visual storytelling. So you want to make sure that a picture or video of your event tells the story of what you're trying to accomplish. You know, the saying is a picture is worth 1,000 words. So if someone turns on the TV and it's on mute and they just see some background images, or you're, you know, a talking head in front of a scene, or they see a picture in the newspaper, are they going to get a sense of who is there and what they're trying to say? Would there be, would people be standing in front of a body of water, or would they be at City Hall or in front of a corporate office? Are they holding signs that communicate the message? Would they see the call to action? So in this example, I'm sharing an image of a plastic monster in front of the Nestle headquarters. This is a Greenpeace campaign, and I think, you know, Greenpeace is like well known for their creative props, and I think that was one thing, depending on, you know, the branding of your organization or the tone that you like to take in your work, getting creative with props can be a good way, and some ways a kind of a kitschy gimmick, but a gimmick that can generate television coverage nonetheless. And so thinking outside the box and thinking creative about what your visuals are going to be at an event is really important. Your location can also provide an important backdrop and an important visual element. You know, where you are can tell the story both about the decision that's about to happen or the impact of an issue on a place or on people. And it can also just create some visual interest in what otherwise might just be like talking heads at a podium. And then another thing I wanted to get people thinking about when you're thinking about events is motion. This is also really important, particularly for TV, is it's not just about the picture, but it's about how it will look on the screen, how it's visually interesting, and motion plays a really big part in that. So are there going to be people rallying and chanting? Is there a march? Is there going to be some kind of activity like are you doing maybe a press event where you're going to be speaking, but then folks are going to go on a river float trip? Is there a ribbon cutting? Another example is if you can get interactive with it. So one issue that I had worked on many years ago now was around investing in electric vehicle infrastructure. And I have had so much success whenever we would plan an event where we had, you know, a demo charging station and cars available, and reporters would always ask, can we test? This was like a decade ago when I think EVs are a little more novel and cool, but can we test drive the cars? Like, are there cars there that we can get our hands on and that we can film in? And so thinking about the interactivity and the motion behind it as well is really going to help generate that interest. And thinking creatively. You know, there's the tried and true thing of if you're going to be delivering hundreds or thousands of petitions to a decision maker, having the line of activists holding banker boxes with signs on them and marching into an office and bringing those in with them is like, you know, that adds a little bit of that element that can be more enticing when we're thinking about broadcast. And so thinking about that when you're planning events, and if you can check off, yes, we've got a visual, sometimes you can kind of create this, but if there isn't a good visual element to your story, it's going to be a little bit harder to get the press and particularly broadcasts out to cover events. Next up is compelling speakers. So when I think about, and we're talking in some ways about kind of like making a traditional press conference a little more interesting. You know, when I think about, I was just talking with Bridget about sporting events, I've been watching lately. And when I think about like press conference, honestly, the first thing that comes to my mind is like the image of like a coach or a player in front of on that table with the mic and the banner behind with the team name, answering questions. Now, I wish that like I was, you know, if the cachet of me showing up to talk somewhere was as good as like LeBron James or Steph Curry sitting at a podium would get that much attention, but it's not. I'll be honest with myself. And so we have to think a little bit about how we're going to create press conferences and events that have that interest. And one of the ways we can do that is through our speakers. And it doesn't mean that you have to have a VIP, although that can be a good way to generate interest. So in this example, we have a picture of EPA Administrator Regan touring a water recycling center during the White House's media push around infrastructure. You know, you can get a local celebrity, try to, or a you know, maybe you or one of the leaders in your organization is kind of a well-known community voice, or an elected official from your town or city or state or federal representative. Those are good ways to draw a crowd. But you can also use your speakers to kind of tell that story and use that to pitch. So someone had mentioned like conflict earlier. One antidote to conflict too that can be really interesting is what we call like odd bedfellows or like unexpected allies. So is there an issue where you're working on where you're actually working with a group that normally you are opposed to? That can be a really good hook, and having that in your speakers can really generate interest with the media. Also demonstrating a broad coalition. So if you want to showcase, actually, there's people from all different segments and sectors who care about this issue or are in support of a bill or something, then that could be your tactic of what you're trying to communicate and showing that through your speakers. So are you demonstrating that wide support by having a public health voice and an environmental activist and a community activist and labor and recreation all together? It's just some examples. Are you going to be putting impacted community members' voices front and center? That's another way to really show it's not just talking heads talking about that. There's going to be real people who are experiencing real issues, and their voices are going to be the ones centered. That is also a way to use your speakers as a compelling part of your event. And lastly, you've got to have a call to action. You want to keep it simple, especially for TV, where you're likely only going to get a minute or two of coverage. And so you really need to get folks on your side in a sentence, and you need to tell them exactly what you're asking them to do. What are you asking the public to do? What are you asking decision makers to do? I know we have Pedro on the line here. This is a great photo that our colleague Jose took in Sacramento a few weeks ago with the Community Water Center at a rally, urging I believe the state Senate to include the water affordability program in the state budget. And what I love about this is there's so much, this call to action is really clear, and it is, there's so much conveyed in this image. So you can see based on the signs, the Susana de Anda, who is is my right, probably the left of Oriol Sandoval at the podium, the emotion on her face, and just the, sorry, a little distracted by the chat. I will come back to that. So I just think this is a really good example of showing how you can incorporate that call to action, people asking for the basic human right of access to affordable, safe water in an event. Okay, and then we're actually going to pause for questions after this slide before we get into some more nuts and bolts. So I will be able to come back to anything going on in the chat. But I wanted to touch on when to go virtual. So it's kind of an exciting time in that, like, we are all here today at a workshop on Zoom. You can also do press events on Zoom or other platforms. And I wanted to basically walk through how I think about when to go virtual and what considerations. I think one of the cons and one of the downsides of doing a press event in a virtual setting is it's a little bit less friendly for TV. But you can get around that by inviting reporters on, making recordings available, or offering up additional one-on-one interviews or additional availabilities in a more interesting visual setting. So maybe you're using a press conference, a virtual press conference, to more peak interest and hopefully get some follow-up. But that is one downside to it. So we've already talked through a bunch of different examples of kinds of in-person events you can do. The traditional press conference, a rally, a tour, live demonstration, ribbon cutting, groundbreaking, that kind of thing, river trips. Virtual press events, I think, have some real upsides, whether you're doing it on Zoom or streamed via YouTube or both, they can be a little bit quicker to pull together, depending on how high tech you want to get. There often can be, it's a lower barrier to entry because folks can just hop on their computer. For the media, they don't have to go anywhere. And so these are the times when I would think about doing a virtual event. And you'll see it's basically when you go through those lists of those 4 elements and you don't have all of them, that might be a good opportunity to go virtual. The first one, even if you've got like all the great elements of an event, but there's safety considerations. So, we are all trying to navigate still this COVID world that we're living in. And if people are not comfortable gathering, if there's other public health reasons why you wouldn't want to come together, say you're doing rapid response for a natural disaster, and it's not safe for people to be out and about. Going virtual, doing a telephone conference or a Zoom conference can be a really good way to activate that rapid response, get your message out there, talk to the media without having to deal with the safety issues of coming together or planning an event. If it's not super timely, so then we'll go back to that first item we talked about, timeliness. So if there's more of an educational opportunity and it's not like directly connected to a decision point, we actually do this a lot at the Water Hub. We host virtual issue briefings for reporters and have had a lot of success both in building relationships with reporters, introducing them to new experts that they can use in their coverage, helping them get a fuller understanding of an issue that will help inform and make their coverage of that issue better in the future as it becomes timely, especially if it's something that's kind of emerging. And so that's something to think about. If you want to bring people together to let them know about something that's coming up, but there isn't like that critical decision point moment, that might be a good time to bring people onto Zoom, because again, there's like less of that time commitment for reporters. It might be a little bit easier for your speakers as well. So that's one thing to think about. If you don't have a great visual or location to help tell your story, say you have some new research coming out, but there isn't like a great backdrop that you can think of, or you're not able to get people out to a place that would help tell the story, or it's just a little bit harder to do, or maybe you've got a lot of charts that will help tell your story, but it's not going to be that great in an in-person event, then Zoom or another virtual setting is a good opportunity for that. And then lastly, when we talked about compelling speakers, say your speakers are really spread out. It'd be really hard to get them together, but they're super great. People want to hear from them. Maybe they're busy. Maybe you've got a VIP, but they can only hop on an hour-long call. They can't travel somewhere. And so that's another opportunity to go virtual. Okay, we're going to pause here for questions before we get into some of the nuts and bolts. I'd love to hear if folks have thoughts. I see there's been a bunch of activity in the chat. Bridget, I don't know if there was any, I'm trying to scroll up, but maybe you see something we should go back to for a moment before we head on, or feel free to raise your hand, folks, too. Let's see here.
Hey, Sarah.
Yeah.
There was a point by Lewis raised about when to give talking points versus organic storytelling. Maybe you can talk about that.
Yeah. Oh, I'm actually seeing there's some debate here too. I think this is a great question. So when I think about talking points, I think about and messaging. I do think messaging is very important. I think it's important to drill down on, if you had to answer the question, like, why are we gathered here today? I think it's really important that the folks involved in the event should be able to say, and maybe this is more for the staff of an organization or the advocates, like you should be able to say in a sentence or two, we are here today to demand X, or we are here today to bring this issue to light, or we are here today to say water is a human right. Like those kind of things, I think, are actually very important to be able to have a very clear and concise clarion call. And one of the great things I think you can do is there's lots of different supporting points that you can make to support that main message. So again, different speakers, different organizations might have a different perspective on the issue. And so allowing folks to then come to support the issue from their perspective. So a recreational business might have a little bit of a twist on why they're supporting something versus someone who's been impacted by pollution or unaffordable water. So I would just think about that, like having that umbrella of like, what's the main mission we are here today asking for? And then thinking about, okay, each speaker you don't want people to repeat each other, right? And so each speaker should bring their perspective. And totally agree that personal stories are incredibly powerful. Speaking from experience, absolutely. I think it probably depends a little bit on folks' comfort level. I think a lot of times people just being able to sort of practice or sharing, have some experience sharing their stories helps it be a little less nervous. But there is, like, I would say the prep work and the talking points and kind of things I have in my experience spent usually a little bit more time drilling into that with like the executive director of the organization I was working on versus where I was like coaching and working with someone who's trying to share their lived experience or their personal experience is a little bit more about just making sure that they feel really comfortable and confident in talking about their experience rather than trying to get them to say something a certain way or change what they're going to say. So hopefully that's helpful. And I also saw one that was reporters don't always seem like they're into building relationships. We'll get into that in the next one, but I thought that was a very funny point. Do we have any other questions, or should I move on? Okay, cool. We'll hopefully have some time at the end. I'll try and skip through this. It's painful to hear my own voice for this long anyway. So we're going to talk about getting the media to show up. So I think it is really interesting to see the comment about reporters not seeming like they want to build relationships. I think this is probably true. I feel like there's a little bit of healthy distance, objectiveness, quote unquote, that comes up. And I know I think we have some former reporters on that call, but I think it's more about, when I say building relationships, I feel more like I'm talking about building rapport, building familiarity. There are, yes, and I see in the chat stuff about consistently inviting them, continuing to be on the radar. That is exactly what I meant. And so this goes into this next section really well. One of the points I wanted to make about the benefits of having in-person events is, so I know when I've never met someone, even if I know them a little bit, this is like a flaw of, me as a human being, is if I know someone, like I've met them, even if we just met in passing at a thing, and I see an email from them, I am actually just more likely to look at it and open it and respond to it than someone that I maybe don't have like a relationship with or I haven't met. And I think the same is just true. We're talking about, when we think about building relationships, it's like with our members, with donors, with decision makers, like it's all about familiarity, rapport. And they say like you build your reputation in drops and you lose it in buckets. Being just a consistent source of good information, just being around, knowing that you're like, I think that is what I mean, and that events actually have a really cool place to play in that, because it can give you the opportunity to meet people in person. And one thing I wanted to note is like every event is a little different, and your timeline is actually dictated by events often outside of your control. So maybe you're doing rapid response and you're like, we heard this thing is coming up in a few days and we've got to get it together. Maybe you have been able to prep for weeks in advance. But what we're going to do, I'm not going to get into like the TikTok of things, but in the share out that we'll share some resources around like checklists and planning guidances. So yes, again, we've talked now in a good sense about building relationships. I've seen so much good stuff in the chat. We have so much knowledge in this virtual room. So just appreciate that so much. And the other points that I wanted to get across are tailoring your outreach for the right reporters. So this is something that I feel like when I'm also trying to do outreach on behalf of partners, even today, even though I know I'm supposed to tailor my outreach, like in my heart, I want everyone to show up because I want people to cover this issue. And so it can feel easy to be like, I'm just going to throw spaghetti at the wall and send this thing to everybody, whatever. And it is really important to actually be thoughtful and think about, okay, who are the reporters who have been covering this kind of issue? How can I tailor it to their beat or their angle? it's a little different for like more general assignment reporters or folks who just cover breaking news stuff, or on TV. It tends to be you're going to like the assignment editor and just saying send somebody and there's less of a beat. But just really thinking about tailoring your outreach and being really specific about who you're inviting to things. Because if you consistently spam reporters who do not write about the issue, will never come to anything, you may be doing yourself a disservice in the long run when you have an opportunity that actually might be right up their alley and that they might be writing about. Similarly, you want to be pleasantly persistent, but not spammy. So reporters are super busy. They get a bajillion emails a day. And sometimes I would say in most cases, they open it, look at it, and then don't respond. And sometimes they still come and write about it. But if they don't respond, it's sort of like a nice way of saying no. That doesn't mean you shouldn't follow up. I would say like after a few days, like sending a follow-up, making that phone call. But if you're not getting a response, it's totally okay to not like follow up in a like annoying way, and then just keep coming back as new things approach. I see a question here about not to use media lists. That's not exactly what I'm saying. I think it's just important that you try to keep them like as fresh and tailored as possible. It is really, I'll just acknowledge this is a real challenge because people are just in the media landscape and industry, people are moving jobs like so much that it can be very challenging to keep it up to date. But yeah, it's like, sometimes one thing I've seen is like, okay, so you've got like, I live here in Denver and there's the Denver Post, and which is, I'll say, I'm opining a little bit, but like, they got bought by a hedge fund a couple years ago. So their reporting team is not like, they should be more robust and supported than they are. But, there's 3 different reporters who tend to cover environmental issues, but they each have a slightly different beat. One has more of like a business focus and focuses on companies. One is kind of more of the like traditional environmental, and one focuses more on politics. And so for me, like, if I'm reaching out to them, like I try to think about, if possible, like, oh, how does this apply to their beat? Or if there's an event where I know like, oh, this person is just like not going to come or cover this, it's like not up their alley, I'll just take them off that list. Okay, so the most important tools when you're doing events in terms of inviting the press, getting them out, getting them to cover, is your media advisory and your press release. These are, and so I'm going to spend a little bit of time, and this is actually from the California Water Affordability Rally the other day, as my example. And so in the follow-up too, we'll share a like sample template of what these look like. I think most folks are probably familiar, but I just wanted to go over kind of quickly like the elements of this that I think are really important. So the media advisory is the tool that you use to invite reporters to cover an event. It's the invitation. The goal here is to make the event sound interesting and newsworthy and present the details in an easy to read format so that reporters and editors can easily skim through and decide if they want to come. I would say for like, if possible, like writers and beat reporters who tend to plan their coverage out a little earlier in advance, if you can get this out a week in advance of an event, that is a good time. And that gives you time to also kind of follow up or answer questions. By contrast, and again, if you can't because you're dealing with rapid response and you can only get it out a few days in advance, that, it's fine too. It's a fast-paced environment. People are used to kind of getting pitches for something that's happening the next day. But particularly for the more kind of longer form stuff, getting it out a week or so ahead of time is ideal. By contrast, television stations tend to make decisions on what they're covering the morning of the day. So you'll want to send the media advisory to that television station or the radio station's assignment desk a couple of days in advance. And those are ones you really want to make sure to call and confirm that they got it, that it's on their calendar, that they're considering it. And then TV stations in particular have meetings in each morning where they meet up, talk about what's happening that day and decide what they're going to cover. So it's usually a best practice to also give them one last pitch call if you can that morning to see if they're going to be able to come and tell them why. So the elements of the advisory. So we've got the kind of date and contact information. Actually, we've got, I'm so sorry, I should have blacked this out, Pedro, your contact info is on here. I did not even think about that. I'm sorry, I hope that's okay. I should have asked. If one thing I want to note here is sometimes the person doing the pitching or answering questions ahead of time might be different for the person who's on site handling the details. And if that's the case, you want to make sure that you note, okay, this is the person who's going to be there day of, and here's their cell phone number. You also want to have a really catchy title or subject line for the email. I think probably as communicators, we are often thinking about like email subject lines for things like marketing emails to get our supporters to open up, but we need to think about that for reporters too. A catchy title, something that's like going to grab attention and is also going to be like very clearly stating what is happening, will help you get more opens of your email and get more folks to decide, to actually read it. I like this one here because it also includes the call to action in the subheader. So it's very clear what this is: a California rally at the state capitol urging lawmakers to include water bill help in the budget. Like that, I understand what that is. I know what a rally is. I know what the state capitol looks like, and I know what they're going to be asking for. And so that's super helpful. And then the next main section of the advisory is going to be the 4 W's: the what, the where, the when, and the who. And this format is set up like this to, and these are kind of like standard formats that are just used. It's just what I was taught. I don't actually know what the origin of it is. Maybe I should do some little history lesson into that. I'm sure it has something to do with like telegrams in the 1900s, but this is a format that will help reporters and editors quickly scan through the information, get the logistical details they need, get an understanding of what the event is, and be able to like easily synthesize that. What I love about here is also there includes links to where their event was going to be live streamed as well. And we'll get to that in a minute. And then another thing, this is scrolling down on this advisory example, is this inclusion of additional background. A faux pas that I see a lot and that I am guilty of myself is including too much detail into the pitch or that what section of the media advisory. That section is just to pique interest, is just your most compelling, most interesting, most important drawing information to get someone to say, oh yeah, I might need to come to that event. That shouldn't be the place where you explain like the decades-long history of an issue. And if a reporter opens an email and all they see is like a wall of text, I can tell you that they will click out of it. And I know I can relate because I sometimes do that too. So as a best practice, what we tend to do is include additional information at the very bottom of an advisory, so that, if someone's scrolling through, they get all the key details, they get the like really quick hit, like what this thing is, why it's important. But then at the bottom, we can provide that additional like context without cluttering up the clear message itself. So that's like what probably my hot tip on media advisories. And then lastly, it's really important to spell out what those visuals will be if you're doing an in-person event. If you're at a location that's an interesting backdrop, or you have an interactive opportunity or a cool prop, be sure to explicitly explain what that is and what it'll look and sound like. And then it's also a best practice to provide, if you can, providing photo and video after an event and letting stations and reporters know that. I have, in my career, successfully generated media hits in TV, online, and on print when a reporter couldn't show up at an event because I was able to follow up with them with a recording and with photos. So making sure that they know that that'll be available is pretty key too. And what B-roll stands for, as folks might know, is like background roll. So that's just like video footage of like just the happenings. The next, I think I just have a few more slides and then we'll be able to have discussion. I always go longer than I think I will in talking. And I can stay on a little after the hour mark too, if folks need. So the press release is what you send to reporters following an event. So this should include a description of what happened, why it was held, and includes quotes, excuse me, from your speakers. This is an example of the top of a press release from something I worked on last year around infrastructure investments for tribal clean water access, a report release. And what you'll want to do is think about the press release as the ideal article that you'd like to see written. So your headline should be direct and punchy and deliver your message. I think this is a pretty good example. Infrastructure investments, a game changer for clean water, tribal clean water access. I think it's pretty clear. I think I came up with that, so I'm patting myself on the back for that one. It shares the message, it shares what the thing is about. And then you want to also think about the press release. And if you have questions about like writing press releases, we'll share an example in the follow-up. And also, we're happy to be here as a resource too. But you basically want to think about them as like an upside down pyramid where your most important information goes at the top, your most important quote goes at the top. And then as you get down the article, you're just like adding in the filler and the stuff that can kind of drop off. And you think about it as like kind of like the above the fold stuff, like when you open an email, the stuff you see without having to scroll. You want to make sure is like your hardest hitting stat, your main message, and your most important quote go up top. And it's honestly because folks tend not to scroll or read to the bottom of things. And so that's how news articles tend to be organized as well. One other note I wanted to send is like things like advisories, press releases, photos that you want to share. Those should never be sent as attachments in an email. I think we're all like on the same page with this these days. It's just a bad practice. People don't like to open them. People don't like to look at them. There's too many viruses going around the computers. So you always want to put these in the body of an email. And if you have resources that you want to share, like PDFs or link, or photos, do them as links. So upload them on like a Google Drive or something like that. Sometimes like I have had people come back to me and say like, for whatever reason, their server wouldn't let them open the G Drive. And so I had to send it to them, but they were asking for it in that situation. And so like, I think that's just something to know is like attachments generally are a no-no. And so really lean on hyperlinks to share resources. Okay, so the press conference, it's over. Last thing we're going to talk about, and then I do want to actually share a video that Jose made from the CWC rally, and it's like a minute or two, so I think we can get to that too before questions, is making the most of events. So what happens if you plan a press event and no media shows up? This has happened to me. It has happened to me. It's okay. It happens. The most important thing is to like plan ahead. So you want to be thinking about how you can make the most of an event regardless of whether the media shows up. So if you're holding an event and no media shows up and you're like, okay, was it worth it to do it? If the answer is still yes, that's a great event. So things that you can do are with our phones these days, we can live stream events from our phones right to social media or to YouTube. It's a great way to allow folks who aren't able to attend in person to watch as well. And you can record those videos. If you're able to have folks who have a little more experience with like photography and video and multimedia, all the better. I think like our phones are doing really well these days. I'm an amateur photographer. Like I have one kind of nicer camera. But if you can get someone who really knows what they're doing, it really makes all the difference. Live tweeting events is a great way to also get engagement, to be able to tag your speakers, and share that with reporters. Like we've actually had some success where like reporters saw quotes we were tweeting out from an event and actually reached out to like the person if they wanted to write about the story. Again, generating your own creative assets. Can you make videos from it? Can you share those pictures with your community are you going to follow up by email with your members, with your coalition partners, with reporters, with donors, with decision makers? That's something that you want to make sure to do. So following up. So this is the way to really get the most out of events is to continue to kind of get those creative assets that you can utilize regardless of whether press show up or not. And then also, as I've mentioned, there can be some really good success with following up with media who weren't able to show in person, but getting them that release, getting them those photos and videos, getting them contacts so they can talk to the speakers and still get some coverage out of that. Okay, so I want to share a video from this rally that folks are talking about because I thought it's just recent and it was so great. And it'll be really short and then we can do a little discussion.
Vinimos de diferentes partes de California exigiendo que el gobernador firme el Senate Bill 222 que dará acceso a agua limpia, agua sana y agua accesible.
But we need funding from the state to make water affordability accessible. And where does that happen? That happens right behind me, here in the state capitol.
Nosotros somos una comunidad pequeña y nuestros biles son muy caros, aparte de que somos los más contaminados. Toda la gente que vivimos ahí, pues somos gente de bajos ingresos y en el nombre de mi comunidad yo le pido, ¿verdad?, al gobierno, que es el que lo eligió el pueblo, su apoyo ahora que van a tomar decisiones con ese dinero que ellos tienen. Entonces nosotros no venimos a pelear, venimos a hacerles saber lo que nosotros estamos viviendo, la voz de nuestros ancianos, la voz de nuestros niños.
I live in a community where my neighbors and I pay $200 a month for water that we cannot drink.
You know, there's a lot of kids here and there's a lot of kids everywhere, especially in smaller communities that don't have water right now because their families can't afford it, and that's ridiculous. Water is a human right. And with this bill passed, it'll be, you know, amazing for these families who can't afford water right now. You know, it's families who need it and families who deserve it.
Pues ahora que no ha llovido ni nada y la sequía está bien fuerte, hemos batallado mucho.
We're in the middle of a drought. The drought never ended in 2019. It only extended. No one deserves to have to pay twice for water. Right. We need to have safe and affordable drinking water right now. We're in the midst of a pandemic. We need to have basic necessities met. That is why we're here. Let's not make this a politician fight. It's a human right situation that we have here. And we're gonna count on you, every single person that's listening to us. If you're a human, you deserve to have safe drinking water. Se puede! Se puede!
Okay. I saw we had Jose join us, so thank you for making that amazing video and for the CWC folks to share that out. But I think that's just I felt was a really great example of how to just continue to extend the life of an event outside of just the media, and yeah, incredibly inspiring. So some questions that we had, and I know folks will probably have to drop off as we get to the time. I'll just say I'll stick around for a little while longer. But is it one question that came up, and thank you, Bridget, for collating these. Is it a higher bar to ask to invite reporters to a press conference? Any tips for stress testing whether an event would likely draw interest? So I think that in this, I don't think it's a higher bar to invite journalists to come to a press conference. That's their job. That's what they're supposed to be doing. Like when I first started out as an organizer, and maybe you all haven't had this issue, I was like, there was an issue that I was working on, and we had, I don't even know what we had coming out, but we were like, oh, should we have a press conference? And I was like, I can't have a press conference. Who am I? It's actually, you can. That's their job to come to them. So I wouldn't consider it a higher bar. The thing I would say is, like, if they don't come, that's okay. Continue to use it as an opportunity to say, hey, I'll send you the follow-up stuff. No worries, you couldn't cover it this time. Hope to get you next time, and just continue to use that as an opportunity to build relationships. I feel like most of the time, like, journalists have to say no to lots of stuff. And it's all just an opportunity to keep building that rapport with them. And then in terms of stress testing the event, I would go through those 4 elements: timely, visual, speakers, and call to action. And if you can answer all 4 of those questions in a way that feels satisfactory to you, then I would say, yes, go for it. That feels like worth putting the time and energy to an event. And so those are the things that I would say. What else was there? Any suggestions on when to do a virtual press conference and you don't have visuals for print media outreach? Oh, when you do virtual and you don't have visuals. I think that like we just did one of these. Again, this was the reason why we did it virtually, is we wanted to educate reporters in California about some drought issues in the Central Valley and farm worker communities. And there were some scientists who had some new research that was coming out, but wasn't quite ready to be published, who had been covering the issue and particularly focused on groundwater. And Bridget actually was working on this. So I'll tell me if I get anything wrong. But one of the reasons we wanted to do that briefing was, okay, there wasn't like a decision point. We didn't really have any visuals, but we just felt like it was a really important issue. And we knew reporters wanted to be writing about it. And maybe they just wanted like to get a little bit of education, a little bit of background information. And so we just had a Zoom conference with talking heads, you know, and that generated actually a couple of written stories after the fact. But our real motivation was just getting the issues framed the way we wanted them to be framed, and our partners wanted them to be framed on reporters' minds, and getting some new experts kind of on their radar. If you don't have visuals too, I would say, like, you know, people use like Zoom backgrounds for things, or you can share photos and stuff like that. But if you don't, and you feel like the content is compelling enough, I say just go for it and try it out. I think we also just like test stuff a lot, and doing it virtually, there's like a lower bar. And so when we're like, let's experiment a little bit, then it gives us, I think, you know, a little bit more freedom to like try things out. What else? Let's see. Oh, thank you, Bridget, for sharing the survey, and everyone for joining us. Were there any other, let's see. Can you give examples of what you would put in your email to tailor the pitch to a specific reporter besides the advisory? From Brian. Yeah, so I'll say usually what I do in my approach is I do like the first kind of hit of the advisory is I just like send it out to my list of reporters I've curated for an event, and I send it out to them. And then usually what I'll do is I'll do some individual follow-up. If there's folks you're really trying to build that rapport relationship with, you might want to withhold them from that big send and do those individual emails. And usually what I'll do is just at the top of right above the advisory, just add a little note. Hey, so-and-so, I wanted to make sure that you saw this because XYZ, or I know you've been covering this issue, and so I thought you might want this new development. Like, let me know if you have any questions. Hope you can make it. Sign off. And that's usually how I would do it. And I'm happy, Brian, to like forward you. Here, I'll put my email in the chat too. And I have yours, I'm sure, but I can forward you some examples of things that I've sent out. This is my email here. But yeah, I think that's a really, really, really great question. Anything else? I hope I got through everything. If not, like, please feel free to reach out to us at the Water Hub. We are here to help. That's what we do. Oh, great, Brian, I'll copy that here. What are your thoughts on taking reporters out for coffee or drinks? We have done some of that at Climate Nexus. Actually, there was this is not a Water Hub team, but some of our Climate Nexus colleagues hosted one of the like pavilions at COP26 in, yeah, that's a good question. At COP26, they've always had a Climate Nexus dinner and like invited reporters, and basically like it was like, hey, we want to show appreciation and also just like a great place to chat, and there'll be these people there that you can chat with, and come or don't come, and different folks have different issues around like gift giving that some outlets have like guidelines around that, where like a reporter like literally cannot take a coffee from you. I'd say I've done it before, like if I wanted to introduce myself to someone and I had reached out to them about something, or they were coming to an event and I was like, oh, I would love to chat with you. You know, it's like a fun, yeah, but I don't know. I have strong feelings about it. I feel like it's the kind of thing I'm always like, yeah, offer, but if people don't want to do it, they'll say no and then don't do it. Maybe they'll just have a phone call with you instead. And I think also having like a reason, but I don't know, Lauren, if that speaks to your, I'll take, as a former editor, I'll take your feedback on it for the rest of the group rather than our advice. I don't think that's like a necessary thing to do. Cool. Anything else? I'm gonna, yeah, next time I do one of these, I'm gonna do it as a meeting and not a webinar, because this is like talking out into the ether is like so painful. Oh, there's a hand, I think. Jessica.
Hey, so I just wanted to ask with, for folks working in comms and, you're often serving the needs of your program staff when they ask you to host an event for, some sort of release. How do you have any tips for folks to, be the voice of reason sometimes, to know like when something isn't press conference worthy, and like how do you manage that and navigate that? And I know it's a little tricky, but thought that would be helpful.
Ooh, Jess is coming in with the good questions here. Okay. Yeah, have you all, I would see if people raise their hand if you've had your boss tell you that you need to plan an event that you don't think you should do. Yeah, I mean, I think that like, again, like when we were talking about kind of that stress test of when you should have events, like that, those 4 elements, to me, those are the most important things: timely, visually interesting, have a clear call to action, and have compelling speakers. And if you can answer yes to those 4 questions, or even probably just 3 of them, I would say you've hit the mark. Like you can go forth and conquer. And being able to kind of explain that to people when they're like, oh, should we have a press conference for this? There's also like alternatives to press conferences. So one of the things that we've actually been doing a lot of recently is around decision moments where we didn't have, honestly, a lot of it's bandwidth, like didn't have the bandwidth to organize an event, or there weren't, we didn't have the visual thing. We didn't think it would be successful. We've instead pitched what we call like media availabilities. So we've reached out to reporters and said, hey, this hearing is about to happen, or this vote's going to happen, or this thing is about to happen. And if you're covering it, these 3 speakers are available to talk to you, and they could do it. If you have a place that would look good, it's like we could meet you somewhere, come in studio, do it on Zoom, whatever. And that is, I think, a really good way to like kind of get around that. It's like if you want to do media on something, but you don't think it rises to that level. And I would say using that and explaining that hopefully would be helpful. And just also making sure folks know like the amount of work that goes into those. You want to make sure that when you do have them, they're going to be as successful as possible. I see if an org is going through leadership and I'll get to the brand. Cultural shifts that affects the way they speak or approach issues in programming. Any recommendations around highlighting this shift with media and media relations? Oh, that's a really interesting question, Allie. I have not thought about that. Yeah, I wonder if, I think it will come through in your materials. So the way that they're speaking about things, so what you're putting out, I think that's that kind of cultural shift just takes time. I'm sure you're doing it with like your members as well. If you've had folks who've been supporters of the organization for decades and you're trying to bring them along on your journey with you, like, I think it's a lot of the same kind of thing. I think in general, reporters are trying to report, like people have preconceived notions, but they're trying to report on what's in front of them. So if you can, if you have a clear understanding with your leadership, and that's coming from, all across the organization, and people are you want to make sure your organization is like singing from the same songbook, so to speak, that will eventually come through. But I would say if there's like reporters or media folks that you have a little bit more of a rapport with, they know who you are, you know who they are, and you run into them at stuff, or you're talking with them about something else, like it might be worth just mentioning like, oh, I just wanted to mention, like, we're thinking about this issue a little bit differently than we used to. So I hope that you'll see that in the types of advocacy that we're doing and the types of materials that we're putting out, and mention it like that. Hopefully that's helpful. And I welcome if my colleagues have other thoughts, but I think that's the kind of thing where, yeah, it's like the long game. Sometimes we have too many electeds that want to be part of the speakers. Yep, that's happened on occasion. I feel like it's a good quandary to have. I mean, there's going to be, I think it's important to strategize with your teams and your coalitions, because there might just be people where, and maybe they have communications people that you can like kind of strategize with a little bit. But like there are kind of people where you just sort of like, you just got to let it go. And I think like setting up, oh, no, you stick around. I don't have to jump. So this is really interesting. Again, I would love if folks want to raise their hand and come off mute too, but yeah, that's really interesting. I mean, I think generally speaking, it's like press conferences shouldn't be more than like 15 minutes, right? Like this is like a press conference and a wedding, the ceremony part of the wedding, in my opinion, I'm sorry if I'm speaking ill of anyone, shouldn't be more than 15 minutes. Like that to me is like a best practice, because people just like, most reporters, I would say, often aren't covering what's in the press conference itself. They're going to do one-on-one interviews after the event anyway, where again, you basically want your speakers to like repeat what they said and say a message, but like keeping comments. And so I think having one strategy that I have done to some success is put together a program just for the speakers with like the times and how long everything will go and when they should get there and who will talk and what the order is and how much time they have. And if you want to talk about like, oh, we're trying to hit these 3 things, like which one do you think your boss or whoever, if you're talking to their staff person, like can hone in on. And it depends on your relationship. Like sometimes they'll let you give them talking points to hit and sometimes they won't, but I think you could just do the best you can to sort of shape the event that way. Prioritize, like making sure that you want to prioritize the folks who are directly impacted by the issue. But yeah, there's a lot of blowhards in public office, and so it just is what it is. But I would say, yeah, if you're like, we have too many agency people and you still want to have the community voice, just have it anyway, even if it goes long. Like that's really important. Anything else? This has been really fun. These are really good questions. All right. Appreciate it. Yeah, it's great to connect with you all. I think we'll close out here, but like hopefully this was helpful. Again, we'll follow up with take the survey, please. Like let us know what you need and want. And we'll follow up with like materials and examples and the recording and all that. All right. Bye, everybody.